Hi everyone, and welcome to our Google Plus Hangout with our CX experts today. We have a great panel in front of you, and we will be hanging out today and discussing the 6 core competencies that CXPA is focused on and how those feed into a well-rounded customer experience professional. I'd like to remind everyone that we do these Google Plus Hangouts the last Wednesday of every month at 12 o'clock Eastern Time. And we do invite you to ask your questions live as we broadcast today. We will be monitoring questions that come into our Google Plus page, as well as questions that are coming into Twitter using the hashtag CXPA Hangout. So please feel free to ask your questions to our Google Plus page or on Twitter at hashtag CXPA Hangout. As a reminder, for today's broadcast only, I'm offering up 1 box of world-famous CXPA cookies to the first live question that comes in now as we've begun our broadcast. So please, by all means, feel free to send us your questions today. I'd like to quickly introduce our panel for you this morning, and we have with us Bruce Temkin from the Temkin Group.
Hello, everyone.
We have Erich Dietz from InMoment.
Hello.
We have Parashar Tori from Fidelity.
Hey there.
And we have Tabitha Dunn from Citrix Systems. And then we will also be joined by Lynn Hunsaker, who is trying to get into our broadcast as we speak. So we might be joined by Lynn Hunsaker from ClearAction as well. So let's go ahead and get rolling. Our first question that we have for all of you today, as we talk again about our 6 core competencies that CXPA is focused on, let's begin by talking about what makes a well-rounded CX professional today. This discipline has really developed over the last 10 years, and I'd be curious to hear from all of you what is essential to the role today. Do any of you feel like you want to get us kicked off?
I can start because I come from a different perspective in the sense that I think of it as less about success as, you know, what's the saying that if you're successful, you don't learn a lot from that, you learn a lot from your failures. And I think a well-rounded professional in any field, and that definitely includes customer experience, is the opportunity to have tested and learn from your failures and be able to grow as results. So you know a lot of what doesn't work as much as you know of what does work because you've tried so many different ways to touch and reach your customers and make a great customer experience.
Thank you, Tabitha.
And
Other thoughts?
I'll add some thoughts. I think when I think about customer experience, I think about the fact that everyone in an organization is involved in delivering ultimately what the customer experience is. So if a customer experience professional doesn't have at least a really strong working understanding of what the dynamics are across the organization, what the leadership has to do, what it has to do with the brand, what it has to do with the entire organization, then they're not going to be as effective no matter how much they might know one small area of discipline really well. So I think to be effective at sort of driving great customer experience, it's important for a customer experience professional to have a well-rounded understanding of how the organization operates.
And if I can piggyback on that one too. I mean, this is a lot to me like when people are talking about what makes a good call center agent. You know, people typically come up with, well, they got to be friendly, they have to be empathetic. Well, what about the underlying fundamentals of, well, guess what? You also have to like routine work. You have to like inflexible schedules. You have to like being chained to your desk. There's these foundational components that, in my opinion, in the CX profession today, a lot of CX leaders, nobody necessarily reports to them. They have to be master influencers, which they can only be successful at if they do what you just described. I mean, if you've got the fundamental understanding and respect of the different operational groups, I think you can be a phenomenal CX leader. But unless you are, again, you have as a skill set to be a master influencer, just in today's landscape, I think that's changing where more CX leaders have budget, have authority, have teams, but not every business is there yet. So I just think, again, as time goes on, that may change. But for now, successful CX leaders are the ones that truly can influence everyone. They understand the strategy, they understand the vision, and they understand how to drive change without anybody actually reporting to them.
Thanks, Erich.
That's a great point. I would just add on to that, on top of it, and in addition to the experiential component, which Tabitha talked about, both good and bad, and what Erich was talking about is like, you don't have to have functional experience in a particular area. There's no way to have functional experience in many large organizations across different disciplines like marketing or distribution or product, but you absolutely need to understand the dimensions and think about those folks as stakeholders and what's important to them and how that aligns with the customer experience strategy, so that you're able to have a better sense of how you can influence them, because it's sometimes customer experience isn't as important to everybody else as it is to us, but there's a way to illustrate that it can enable their business goals and what's important to them as well, so that it's good for everybody.
And just I'll throw in one last comment from my side on this too. Nothing frustrates me more when I'll chat with a CX leader and I'll ask them about, okay, when's the last time you lived a day in the life of your customer or your frontline employees? If you're in the communications business, have you ridden with a tech one day? Have you sat in a call center? You're not going to get the organization's respect unless you've truly lived the front lines from both sides.
And I'd like to pile on a little bit on what Paris said too. I think the notion of influencing stakeholders is a critical one, and even the way he described it, that customer experience may or may not be important to other stakeholders, and in some cases it may be very important, but they don't understand it. And so if you're going to influence them, you have to speak their language. It's sort of like if you wanted to do business in China and you flew to China and you didn't speak Chinese, and you went over there and tried to speak English and no one understood what you were saying, they'd be frustrated and you'd make no impact. Well, when you think about stakeholders, the same thing. You have to talk their language. You have to understand what's important to them. You have to understand what their priorities are. And that's the only way you're going to be able to influence them, and that requires, I think, a broader understanding of the business than just sort of a little domain around CX.
All right, let's move on to our next question. And a reminder for all of you who are watching this broadcast live, please feel free to go ahead and send us your questions or your comments as well to hashtag CXPA Hangout, or leave them here as comments on the Google Plus page as well. Okay, the next thing I want to do is hold up our 6 core competencies that we're going to discuss next. These are the 6 core competencies that CXPA has identified. And my question to all of you is, with these core competencies in mind, how did we land on these? How did we land on these competencies? And where might CX professionals get tripped up when we're talking about being well-rounded in all of these areas? So let me hold that up one more time.
And while you're doing that, let me comment. That's pretty cool.
I'm doing this with one of our fellow CXPA experts in mind, Jim Rimbach, who always comes to a Google Plus Hangout with some type of prop. So that is our prop today. So with our 6 core competencies in mind, how did we come up with those competencies? Why did we decide on those 6 things? And where could a professional get tripped up in becoming well-rounded in all of those areas? Does anyone want to?
I can probably start, and the rest of the team can add on to the second part of the question. When we set out to create the CCXP last year, we spent a good amount of time understanding all the different dimensions that people had. So, and what they might train people on, what we saw in books, what we saw in terms of leadership best practices, and we basically created a matrix of what everybody was talking about. And they all had commonality in these kind of 6 large categories, which is how we came up with them. In many cases, they use the same words, and sometimes they may call it something slightly different. Around customer research, other people call it voice of the customer. But we really sought to look at the landscape of the CX ecosystem and found where there was commonality, that people were using these concepts, and we came up with the 6 different ones, and thought that they were broad enough and that they were substantive enough and reflective of what was happening in the marketplace to establish those as the firm's 6 competencies. You will find that some people might talk about them a little differently. Forrester might talk about them a little bit differently. Bruce has a lot of alignment around them, but also has some other components that he talks about. But in general, we felt like these established the CCXP and established the competencies as the core pieces that CX professionals would want to get experience around or understand what was inside of them, and also practice them, more importantly, to deliver great experiences in whatever industry or whatever company you're in. Bruce, anything else you'd add?
Yeah, I would add, I think that's a great description of how we came about them, and I would like to sort of talk about the importance of having a fundamental 6, and I think it's, as Parrish talked about, our Temkin group, we have a little bit different model and a little bit different set of things, which I think is okay for across the board for people who have differences, but for us as an association, as sort of the holder of the standards, I think that it's important for us all to say, all right, this may not be the exact list that we would come up with. It may not hold everything that we might talk about, but we should feel good about it having the most important things and a majority of them, and having a standard 6, could be standard 5 or whatever, is a great way for us to collectively say, here's what the CX profession is about. It's not about a set of random things. It's not about this soft, squishy stuff that people think customer experience is about. It's about 6 important competencies. And that's why it's exciting to me that we have 6, and I would urge everyone to sort of line up behind it and do what you want, have your own stuff going on, but when someone asks, what is really customer experience about, what's the profession about, it's great for us all to say it's about doing these 6 competencies.
Tabitha, Erich, would either of you want to address, how you maintain a well-rounded discipline in all of these areas?
Ladies first.
Well, then I will dive in. I'd say that, having been one of the earliest, what is it, Leslie? I was 4th or 5th to get my certification. I was really hoping to be number 1, but I'm just a little competitive that way. But having done it early on, it was interesting to me because I come at customer experience from a customer support and a Lean Six Sigma background. So I come at it from really kind of an analytical perspective, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to look at it and say, oh, wow, if I look at these 6 disciplines, I can actually see how I have had the opportunity to work in each of these areas of the disciplines. I never really laid them out that way, but it actually made it for a very nice planning framework from my perspective. I could suddenly go, yeah, hey, this makes sense to me. And I can really use this as a nice kind of common language framework. And when I go out to ask for best practices, because I always feel there's so much great knowledge in our peers to gain and really learn from, I like using that framework to be able to say, hey, what have you guys done in organizational adoption, for example? I'm looking at, there's stuff you do midstream. Hey, the company's really bought in, but, how do you keep it current and keep it really front and center for people in different ways? And I can then ask questions in that common language of my peers. So I really appreciate being able to utilize that framework that way.
Yeah, and I really don't have a ton to add to what's already been said. I mean, I think, just having a framework, coming back to something Bruce was talking about, I don't care if it's 4, 5, 6, whatever, just having a starting point for an organization. And oh, by the way, I think the 6 you came up with, or that the group came up with, are great because it kind of covers cradle to grave from strategy all the way through to the accountability side of things and everything in between. I think the ones, I think they're critical. They're a great 6. The ones that, at least working with clients, that they continually get tripped up on would probably be the culture aspect, and then because I think accountability is a byproduct of culture. That a lot of businesses struggle, that if you don't have true senior leadership that is really aligned on the customer experience, a customer-centric culture is pretty damn hard to come by. Again, without that senior sponsorship, and it can't be a flavor of the month. So as a professional and as a leader in an organization, of course, I'm going to do my best to drive a customer experience culture or a customer-centric culture. But where I work with clients and hear a lot of frustrations around, unless it's really embraced, not as a flavor of the month, from the top down, it can be a tough road.
Anyone else want to add on this one before we move on? All right. Let's take question number 3, our last question. And just a reminder to those of you who are following along, if you have questions for us or if you have a comment that you'd like to add in, please do so with hashtag CXPA Hangout, or you can leave the comment on our Google Plus page. And we would like to thank Emily Nelson and Laura at Vision Edge Marketing for tweeting along with us today. So we really appreciate both of you. Thank you for that. And it looks like we are welcoming Lynn Hunsaker to our Hangout just in time for the last question. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you.
And we've got you loud and clear. So here is our last question for the panel today. All right, so we just talked about the 6 core competencies that CXPA is centered around. These competencies are also the blueprint for the certification for Certified Customer Experience Professionals, the CCXP certification. This, of course, is because of these areas are, known to make a well-rounded professional in the discipline of customer experience. So what is certification in this field? Why is it so essential? And what are some considerations around applying for a CCXP certification in customer experience?
Well, every field that has a great track record of respectability and longevity and clarity around what it is has some kind of certification that standardizes what people view to be the qualifications in that field. So as we all know, the definition of customer experience varies widely, and the practice varies widely across industries and companies. And I think that this certification does a lot for the credibility and sustainability of our profession, as well as helping us all get on the same page with regard to certain terminology and practices so that we can take the profession further in maturity.
Thanks, Lynn. Anyone else have thoughts on certification and what it means to this discipline?
Well, I think Lynn hit it right on the head, and one of the reasons we put it together is we wanted to have something that reflected the growth and the promise and the fundamental components that we were talking about whenever anybody was talking about customer experience, and that it definitely is a reflection of how mature and how broad customer experience is becoming across industries, across companies. And it was essential for the CXPA as the only kind of unbiased, kind of non-profit entity in the CX ecosystem. We were the perfect people to establish that. We didn't have any for-profit interest into it. We had the interest of the profession and the professionals inside it to establish it. And so why is it essential? It's essential for the profession, but it's as essential for the individuals that can now say that they are definitively customer experience professionals that are well-rounded in these categories, that have had experience or have a full knowledge and understanding of what's in these categories, because it will ultimately help them be more successful in the experiences they create in the companies that they serve.
And I think of it as a hiring manager. So I couldn't agree more that it's great as, from my perspective as a professional. But it's also good from my perspective as a leader when I'm trying to hire people that, I can then understand, if I'm looking for someone that has a broad level of knowledge and skills and experience, I know kind of what standard that I would want them to really have set, and that they've actually reached for that in their professional development as well. And it helps me encourage my team to have something to reach for if they really want to continue to grow their career in customer experience.
And I would add to the I think the importance to the marketplace and to customer experience professionals for a certification is really critical, because when I think about sort of how the world thinks about customer experience, you can think, well, maybe some people will think that customer experience is important, get them that far. But they may not think about what it takes to actually deliver great customer experience, and so that's where we get sort of there are a set of disciplines around that. But that still doesn't get us to the point where people will say, well, are there a group of people that can drive those disciplines that can create great customer experience? And I think that's where the certification part comes in, right? Because we actually have, you know, we've established customer experience is important. We've identified what it takes for companies to actually improve. And now with certification, we can point to and say, oh, by the way, to make this happen, there's a group of people who have dedicated their professional lives to it, who've built up skills, and are doing this as a profession, not just on the side and not just doing it in sort of soft stuff. So I think the creation of the certification is a wonderful way to say, hey, there's a bunch of people that do this for a living, do it well, and you should think about hiring them, as we heard, or think about really encouraging people in your organization to become one of them.
Yeah, I mean, and at the end of the day, I mean, this industry, this customer experience industry, is at somewhat of a tipping point. Lynn, kind of what you talked on, we're finally at that maturity where we need something like this. And then Paris, based on what you said, I mean, who better to do it than a group of, you know, it's a nonprofit organization that is dedicated, you know, their professional lives to this. And, you know, Bruce, with a lot of the data that you've produced, when you look out across, you know, the global brands, they are still very immature relative to true disciplined customer experience. So if nothing else, too, I look at these standards as this group has finally put a buoy on the horizon to say, here's something to shoot for. Here's something to aspire, because, you know, Bruce, you got the numbers. It's, you know, 30-some-odd% of the businesses are actually in what we'd consider a mature place in their CX journey. So, I mean, I'm encountering a lot of CX leaders that, hey, guess what? They just got the promotion from marketing, and in all honesty, they don't know what the hell they're doing. And so we at least now have a spot to say, hey, listen, there is a place where we can all speak the same language and give you some guiding principles for how to do CX right. In our respectful opinion, this is how we think it should be done. And it's just, again, the market is finally at a maturing point where we need it. And once again, who better to produce these than this organization?
Oh, anybody want to follow that? I think that sounds like a great spot. All right. We're going to go ahead and wrap up this Google Plus Hangout with our CX experts today. It's been a really fantastic conversation, and I want to remind all of our viewers that you can always join these Google Plus Hangouts the last Wednesday of every month at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We encourage you to follow along, to tweet, and to ask questions using hashtag CXPA Hangout. And I'd like to put out one more reminder. We are right now in the process of preparing for our second annual Worldwide Customer Experience Day. So I encourage you to check out cxday.org, and please feel free to join us and celebrate. We'll be doing Google Plus Hangouts from around the world that day. So October 7th of 2014, we look forward to celebrating more customer experience with all of you. Thanks to our panel today, to Bruce and Erich, Lynn, Parrish, and Tabitha, and we look forward to seeing you on our next Hangout. Thank you, everyone.